She never read a physiology textbook in her life, and she could still tell you who was going to be fine and who was not. She watched it in small things. The hand that started reaching for the back of a chair before sitting down. The way someone turned their whole body to check behind them instead of just glancing over a shoulder. The new grip on the stair rail that hadn't been there the year before. She would say, "Hold the rail, mind your step, get proper shoes with a grip," and she was not being fussy about it. She had buried friends who broke a hip in autumn and were gone by spring, and somewhere along the way she had connected the two without ever needing a diagram. What she was reading, without a name for it, was a slow erosion in a system nobody had ever explained to her. She could not have told you about muscle spindles or hair cells, or a structure called the cerebellum holding half the neurons in the nervous system. She only had decades of watching people age around her, filing away which small changes in how someone moved turned out to matter and which didn't, until the pattern was as clear to her as a weather forecast. There is a specific memory a lot of people carry from watching a grandparent decline, and it usually is not the diagnosis. It is a smaller moment. The afternoon she suddenly needed both hands on the counter to reach for a cup she used to grab without looking. The first time she asked someone to walk beside her on gravel, instead of walking it alone the way she always had. None of it looked like an emergency. It looked like nothing at all, which is exactly why almost nobody flags it as the beginning of anything. In 2022, a research team led by the sports physician Claudio Gil Araujo published a study that finally caught up to what she had been seeing her whole life. They gave more than 1,700 adults between the ages of 51 and 75 one simple task. Stand on one leg, unsupported, for 10 seconds, foot resting against the opposite ankle, arms at your sides. Then they tracked those people for an average of 7 years and recorded who lived and who did not. The adults who could not hold the position for the full 10 seconds had a death rate over the following years that was roughly 84% higher than those who could. And that gap survived every statistical adjustment the researchers threw at it. Age, body weight, heart disease, diabetes, cholesterol. A test that costs nothing, needs no equipment, and takes less time than reading this paragraph was tracking something about the human body more precisely than half the panels your doctor runs every year. Run the fuller version of that assessment, both legs, eyes open and eyes closed, and you land somewhere around 90 seconds total. What that 90 seconds is actually measuring, and why it turns out to predict something as final as how long you have left, is what the rest of this is about. It helps to sit with how strange that is for a moment before moving past it. Cardiologists spend careers refining models that combine cholesterol panels, blood pressure trends, family history, and imaging to estimate a person's risk over the coming decade, and those models are genuinely valuable. None of them require you to stand still on one leg in your kitchen, and yet, in a population followed for years, this test outperformed a meaningful share of what those more elaborate models were built to capture. That is not an argument against cholesterol panels. It is an argument that something about standing on one leg is tapping a layer of the body those panels were never designed to see. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Stand on one leg right now if you can, and notice the sensation. It feels like stillness. It is not stillness. It is a fall, caught over and over, dozens of times a second, so fast you never get to see it happen. Your body is a tall, narrow column balanced on a small base, and physics wants it on the ground. The instant your center of mass drifts past the edge of your supporting foot, gravity starts pulling you toward the floor, and left alone you would land within a second. You do not land, because a deep coil of nerve fibers wrapped around fibers inside your calf muscle, called a muscle spindle, is catching the drift the moment it starts. When your ankle tips even a fraction of a degree, the muscle on the outside edge stretches, the spindle inside it fires, and a signal travels up your leg at roughly 100 meters a second, faster than you could consciously register it, telling your spinal cord exactly how much the muscle just lengthened. A reflex fires back down before the tip ever becomes visible, and you stay upright. The spindle itself has no idea what any of this means. It does not know you are 68 years old, that you are standing in a kitchen, or that the number of seconds you can hold this position is quietly correlated with how many years you have left. It knows one thing: the muscle it sits inside just changed length by a certain amount at a certain speed, and it reports exactly that, nothing more, and falls silent again until the next stretch. The meaning gets assembled somewhere else entirely, further up the chain, by structures that never stop combining thousands of these single, narrow reports into something that feels, from the inside, like nothing more complicated than standing still. That correction is one voice in a chorus your nervous system is running constantly. Your brain is fusing 3 separate streams of information into a single answer, over and over. Every fraction of a second you remain standing. The first stream is proprioception, the sense of where your body sits in space, arriving from muscle spindles, from pressure sensors in the soles of your feet, from tension sensors in every joint and tendon. The second is vestibular input, coming from fluid-filled canals in your inner ear, where tiny hair cells bend with every tilt and acceleration of your head, a biological gyroscope accurate to a fraction of a degree. The third is vision, your eyes reading the drift of the room around you to judge your own sway. These 3 streams rarely agree completely, and your brain does not simply average them. It weighs them, deciding moment to moment which source to trust more, and shifting that trust as conditions change. Close your eyes while standing on one leg, and you feel this instantly, because you have just deleted an entire stream, and the sudden wobble is your brain scrambling to re-weight everything onto the 2 that remain. The structure running this fusion is the cerebellum, tucked at the base of your brain, holding more than half the neurons in your entire nervous system inside a fraction of its volume. It does not just react to your position, it predicts where your body is about to be, compares that prediction against the incoming signals, and cancels the error before it grows large enough for you to notice. A smooth, quiet one-leg stand is the visible signature of a cerebellum staying ahead of the fall. A wobble, an arm flying out, a tapping foot, is the readout of that prediction falling behind. Even standing on 2 feet, perfectly still, you are never actually still. Measure the pressure under a standing person's feet with sensitive enough equipment, and you will see the body tracing small, constant circles, hunting for a balance point it never quite settles on. Researchers call this postural sway, and it can be plotted as a path, a wandering loop a few millimeters wide that never closes. A young, healthy nervous system produces a small, tight loop. A compromised one produces a larger, slower, more erratic path, visible on the recording long before it is visible to anyone watching the person stand. Remove one leg from the base, and you roughly halve your base of support, and the entire calculation gets harder, faster, and less forgiving of any single weak input in the chain. Engineers who study control systems have a term for what your nervous system is doing here: closed-loop feedback control. The same principle that keeps a drone stable in wind, or a cruise ship steady in swell. Sensors reporting error, a controller calculating a correction, actuators applying it, and the loop repeating fast enough that the system never visibly drifts. Your body has been running a biological version of this loop since before you could walk, and the one-leg stand simply removes enough of the safety margin that any weakness in the loop becomes visible in seconds instead of staying hidden for years. The version of the test that runs closer to 90 seconds is not a different test. It is the same core assessment, extended to expose more of the machinery at once. Roughly 10 seconds standing on the right leg, 10 on the left, then the same again with your eyes closed, deleting vision and forcing the brain to lean entirely on the inner ear and the body's own sensors, with rest in between. Some versions add a narrow tandem stance, heel to toe, for another stretch on each side. Add the instruction, the transitions, and a couple of these components together, and the full assessment runs close to 1.5 minutes. The headline mortality figure from the Araujo research applies specifically to the 10-second single-leg version, and it deserves to be stated plainly rather than blurred into a bigger number for effect. What the longer 90-second version buys you is not a different statistic. It is a more complete diagnostic, because it stress tests each of the three sensory streams individually, rather than all at once. And a person who sails through the open eyes stance but collapses the instant their eyes close is revealing something specific. Their proprioception and vestibular system are compensating for vision, not standing on their own. That distinction has practical weight beyond curiosity. A person who fails primarily on the eyes closed component is someone whose risk spikes disproportionately in low light, in an unfamiliar dark hallway, in the seconds after waking at night, which happens to be exactly when a large share of falls in older adults actually occur. A person who fails even with eyes open is telling a different story, one more likely rooted in proprioceptive or muscular decline than in any single sensory dropout. The 10-second version catches the overall picture. The fuller version starts to localize where in the chain the fraying is worst, which is useful information whether you are the person doing the test or someone watching a parent do it. This is why the test predicts so much more than it appears to test. It is not measuring your leg. It is measuring the integrity of an entire integrated system. The spindles, the hair cells, the retina, the nerves carrying every signal, the cerebellum doing the fusion, and the muscles executing the final answer. When that system is intact end to end, 90 seconds is almost boring. When it has begun fraying anywhere along its length, the strain shows immediately, and it shows in a way no blood panel or scan captures, because balance requires every part of the chain to work together in real time, and nothing exposes a weak link in a chain faster than asking the whole chain to hold weight at once. Clinicians have built entire assessment tools around this same logic, long before the Araujo data made headlines. The CDC's standard fall risk screening protocol for older adults includes a sequence of standing positions of increasing difficulty, feet together, one foot staggered ahead of the other, a full tandem stance, each held for a set number of seconds, precisely because a single stance rarely tells the whole story. The Berg Balance Scale, used widely in physical therapy clinics, scores 14 separate tasks, from standing unsupported to turning to look behind you. For exactly the same reason, the 90-second version of this test adds eyes closed and tandem components. No single position stresses every part of the chain equally, and a fuller picture requires stacking a few of them together. The one-leg stand became famous because it is simple enough to do in a kitchen and still carries most of the same signal. A single hair cell deep in your inner ear, encased in some of the densest bone in your body, is dying right now, quietly, the way it has been doing since before you were old enough to notice. You were born with a fixed allotment in each ear, something on the order of tens of thousands of these cells. And unlike the cells lining your gut or replenishing your skin, they do not regenerate in humans. Loud noise, certain medications, reduced blood flow, and simple decades of metabolic wear pick them off one at a time, and by the 7th or 8th decade of life, a meaningful fraction is gone for good. The biological gyroscope keeps reporting which way is down, but with steadily less resolution, more static in the signal, and a cerebellum trying to build a stable prediction from an increasingly noisy input. Proprioception fades on a parallel track, and it is worth pausing on why the feet in particular matter so much here. The soles carry among the densest concentrations of mechanoreceptors anywhere on the skin, precisely because they are the only part of the body in continuous contact with the ground, reporting the shifting distribution of weight across the arch with every micro-adjustment of stance. That density is not incidental. It is the body's primary early warning system for a lean before it becomes a fall, and it is also one of the first places circulation-related sensory decline shows up, particularly in anyone with reduced peripheral blood flow. The muscle spindles that fire when a muscle stretches grow less sensitive with age as well. The pressure sensors in the soles of the feet, the ones reporting exactly where your weight sits across your arch, lose density, especially where circulation has declined. And the nerve fibers carrying every one of these signals are wrapped in a fatty insulation called myelin that thins and frays over the decades, slowing the pulse that once traveled near 100 meters a second. The delay this introduces sounds trivial, a matter of milliseconds, but balance is a real-time correction loop, and a correction that arrives even slightly late lets the body lean further before it fires, which then demands a bigger, later, clumsier correction in response. The smooth anticipation of a younger nervous system degrades into reactive scrambling. Vision fades too, in its own way. The lens stiffens and yellows, letting less light reach the retina. Contrast sensitivity drops, peripheral vision narrows, and depth perception, the calculation that tells you exactly how far down the next stair actually is, becomes less reliable. Researchers estimate that by age 70, the retina is receiving roughly a third of the light it received at 20, not because the eyes stop functioning, but because the aging lens and a smaller pupil opening let progressively less of the available light through in the first place. A dim hallway that a younger person navigates without a second thought becomes, for an older visual system, functionally closer to standing in near darkness. The cruelty in the arithmetic is that your brain's usual strategy for handling one weak input is to lean harder on the others, and in aging, there is no strong input left to lean on. All three streams are degrading at once, and the cerebellum performing the fusion is itself shrinking, losing volume and losing the large branched neurons, called Purkinje cells, that carry its final corrected output to the muscles. Post-mortem studies of cerebellar tissue have documented measurable Purkinje cell loss accumulating across the decades of adult life, a slow attrition that tracks with the same timeline as the sensory losses feeding into it. The instruments get noisier, the wiring gets slower, and the processor doing the math gets weaker, all on the same timeline, which is precisely why the decline in balance so often looks sudden from the outside, even though nothing about the underlying process was sudden at all. What changes quickly is not the biology, it is the point at which the accumulated losses finally exceed the system's ability to compensate. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. There is a second failure hiding behind the sensory one, and it is the reason a wobble sometimes becomes a catastrophe rather than a stumble you shake off. Muscle fiber comes in two broad categories. Slow twitch fibers are enduring and fatigue resistant, built for posture and steady effort. Fast twitch fibers are explosive, built for the sudden, powerful contraction that throws a foot out to catch you when balance genuinely fails. Age strips muscle mass in general, a process called sarcopenia, but it strips fast twitch fiber preferentially, faster than the slow twitch fibers beside it, which means the exact tissue responsible for the emergency catch is the tissue eroding fastest. The older body is hit from two directions at once. The sensors that would have detected the imbalance early are degraded, so the lean progresses further before anyone notices, and the muscle that would have arrested an advanced fall has been quietly weakened, so the rescue itself is underpowered. Falls are the leading cause of injury-related death in adults over 65, and a hip fracture, the signature injury of a bad fall in an older person, carries a mortality rate of roughly 20 to 30% within the first year. Somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 3 people who break a hip past that age will be dead within 12 months, and rarely from the fracture itself, which surgeons can usually repair. They die from what the fracture sets in motion, the forced immobility that lets fluid pool in the lungs and breed pneumonia, that lets blood clot in still leg veins and travel somewhere dangerous, that strips away even more muscle from disuse, that erodes the confidence and independence that kept the person moving in the first place. A single fall, on a single afternoon, can be the hinge a whole life swings on. For the people who survive the year, the cost is often measured differently, in a version of life that shrinks. The apartment on the second floor becomes a problem. The garden that used to get tended every morning goes untouched. The independence that once seemed permanent turns out to have been resting on a system nobody was maintaining, and once it goes, rebuilding it back to where it was is a far harder climb than protecting it would have been. There is a second, quieter mechanism that often does as much damage as the fall itself: fear of falling again. Geriatric researchers have documented this as a distinct clinical pattern, sometimes described as post-fall syndrome, in which a person who has fallen once begins restricting their own movement out of caution, walking less, avoiding stairs, sitting more. The restriction feels protective in the moment. Mechanically, it works against them. Every system traced through this script, the cerebellum's prediction model, the fast twitch fibers, the strength of the whole postural chain, depends on continued use to stay sharp, and a person who stops moving out of fear of falling is quietly accelerating the exact decline that made the fall likely in the first place. The caution meant to prevent a second fall often builds the conditions for one. For most of the 20th century, the working assumption in neuroscience was that the adult brain was essentially fixed, wired in childhood and hardened from there, with nothing left to do past a certain age but manage the decline as gracefully as possible. That assumption held for decades in part because the tools to disprove it did not yet exist. It took advances in imaging and in the study of stroke recovery, watching adult brains rebuild functional pathways around damaged tissue, to force a genuine reconsideration. The adult nervous system turned out to be far more willing to reorganize itself than the earlier doctrine ever allowed, and nowhere is that willingness more useful, or more directly testable in a kitchen, than in the cerebellum, one of the most trainable structures in the entire nervous system. Practice a one-leg stand daily, even a few minutes at a time, and the first improvement is not strength and is not the senses recovering. It is the fusion itself getting sharper. The cerebellum, given a repeated challenge, builds a better internal model of your specific body, your specific sway, the specific delays in your specific nerves, and compensates for all of it with a tighter prediction loop. This is why balance training produces visible results within days, long before any tissue could plausibly have regrown. The first week of improvement is the software updating. What comes later is the hardware following. Training with variation accelerates this. Close your eyes on one leg, and you force the brain to lean harder on the vestibular and proprioceptive streams, strengthening its ability to use them well, which builds exactly the redundancy that matters when the lights go out or the ground turns uneven in real life. Stand on a soft or uneven surface, and you degrade the foot sensors on purpose, forcing the rest of the system to compensate and grow more capable in the process. Strength returns too, and the research on this is not ambiguous. Fast twitch capacity. The fiber-type sarcopenia takes first, rebuilds under resistance training even in people in their 70s and 80s, more slowly than it would in a younger body, but it rebuilds. Frail nursing home residents in their 90s have measurably increased their strength within weeks of starting resistance training, some trading walkers for canes and canes for walking unaided. Studies on structured balance training programs in community-dwelling older adults, run over 8 to 12 weeks, have reported meaningful reductions in fall rates compared to untrained control groups, with the earliest gains in postural control often appearing well before the study's midpoint, consistent with the idea that the nervous system's own recalibration is doing much of the early work. The hair cells in the inner ear are the one component that does not come back once lost, the honest exception in an otherwise responsive system, and it is worth naming clearly rather than glossing over for the sake of a tidier story. What training rebuilds is not the sensor itself. It is the brain's ability to extract a cleaner, more useful signal from whatever the remaining sensors can still provide, combined with genuine gains in the muscle and coordination that surround it. That is a real, measurable improvement, even if it is not a full restoration of what time has taken. Everything else in the chain, the myelin's functional efficiency, the strength of the fast twitch fibers, the sharpness of the cerebellum's prediction model, answers demand when demand returns. Stand near a kitchen counter or a sturdy chair, close enough to catch yourself. Lift your right foot, rest it against your left ankle, arms at your sides, and hold for as long as you comfortably can, working toward 10 seconds. Switch sides. Once both sides feel manageable, repeat the same 2 positions with your eyes closed, and notice how much harder the task becomes the instant vision is gone. That is the reweighting happening in real time, and it is exactly the training the system needs. Add a narrow tandem stance, one foot directly in front of the other, heel touching toe, for another 10 seconds per side once the basic version feels easy. Turn your head slowly from side to side while balancing to challenge the vestibular system directly, forcing it to keep reporting which way is down even as the input itself is moving. A handful of slow rises onto the toes and a few controlled squats call on the fast twitch fibers directly, rebuilding the explosive strength that a genuine stumble would require to recover from. Progression matters more than intensity here. In the first week, simply establishing your baseline on each of the 4 positions, eyes open on each leg, eyes closed on each leg, is enough. Note the seconds honestly, rather than the seconds you wish were true. In the following weeks, add a few seconds at a time as each position stops feeling effortful, and only then start layering in the head turns, the soft surface, and the tandem stance. The goal is not to make the test as hard as possible as quickly as possible. It is to keep the nervous system meeting a challenge just slightly beyond what it currently finds easy, the same principle that governs strength training in a gym, applied instead to the machinery that keeps you off the floor. None of this needs equipment, a gym membership, or money. It needs the floor you already have, and roughly 90 seconds you already have. And the return on that specific 90 seconds sits near the top of anything preventive medicine has to offer, because you are not training a party trick. You are maintaining the integrated system the original 10-second test measures, the same system whose failure predicted an 84% higher mortality risk in over 1,700 adults followed for 7 years. The same system standing between an ordinary evening and a fall that ends in a hip fracture, and too often, a year that does not follow it. Your grandmother never needed the mechanism explained to know the pattern was real. Tomorrow morning, near the counter, you can go find out where you currently stand, and then start giving the system the one thing it has been waiting for the whole time. A reason to keep answering. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.